those are just some of the basic statistics that I had to bring. I'm not sure if that helps give you a picture. I'm open to any other questions or future requests to bring more information.
Okay, let's finish with with everyone included. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I think the highlight of those numbers really speak to the significant intended impact of realignment has been achieved. The change in the intake and really maximizing the use of our state prison facilities for the most violent and serious, I think, are the summary of what those numbers indicate. And then the change in the parole numbers, one of the great things that was accomplished was eliminating the inefficiency of that churn in our population with the parole revocators coming back into our facilities for short periods of stay and going back out. I think that that's an important contextual piece, because taking from some of the notes in the agenda, there's this question about the change in the second strike population and change in county practices. I think it's important to note that overall the intended effect of realignment has been achieved. The prisons are being used for the most serious violent. We've reduced the inefficiency of that churn, but we've also changed the options that the counties have for managing offenders. Jay was speaking about the revocation process. That's a fundamentally different scenario today. So I think just a very important contextual piece. Overall, I think in terms of the staff recommendation for population, it's prudent. At the time of the May revise, we're going to have more refined numbers on both our capacity expenditures as well as the update in the population data. Realignment was a significant change, and one of the really difficult things is, given the magnitude of that change, it's really difficult to forecast forward, appreciating that we got about 97% of it right, but it's difficult to forecast forward exactly how much that's going to affect the population. So to the extent we're talking about a 2,000 or so swing right now, that number will be refined at the time of the May revise. So the staff recommendation is prudent.
Thank you. Let's go on here from Department of Finance.
Audrey Bezos, Department of Finance. I actually think Jay and Scott did a pretty good review of this item, so I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about the 14-15 governor's budget or questions, but I have no further comments.
Okay, and LAO?
So we have a couple of comments about the specific budget proposals, and then we can make some more general comments about the population trends. So let me start off with the budget adjustments. I think in general, the projections that CDCR has put forth are reasonable, and the associated budget adjustments are reasonable, generally speaking. We do have one concern with the budget adjustments, and that's related to the California healthcare facility in Stockton. So just a little bit of background, that facility was projected to have all of its 1,700 beds full by the end of 2013, but for various reasons, some of those beds haven't been activated. So, for example, there's some mental health beds that are operated by the Department of State hospitals that were delayed. Some of them haven't even been opened to this point. There's about 150 beds that we're aware of that haven't been opened yet. And our concern is that there was no budget adjustment incorporated to reflect that there's been a delay in the activation of those housing units, because if those housing units aren't active, there's reduced costs for CDCR to kind of guard because there's no inmates to guard in the units. There's no one to escort throughout the prison, or less people to escort, and so there should be some savings in our view, and it's not reflected in the budget adjustment. So our recommendation there is just that the department come back at May revise and have incorporate budget adjustments to reflect the delayed activation of some of those beds at CHCF. So that's our specific recommendation about the budget adjustments. I have a couple comments more generally about the population trends. As the Secretary alluded to earlier, we are in a situation where we do have to comply with the court-ordered population cap. As such, we are concerned that growth in CDCR's prison population will make it more difficult to maintain compliance with that cap over time. So given that context, I think it's especially important for the legislature to pay particularly close attention to these population trends at this point in time. And so in our view, the first step to understanding kind of how to the first step you should take is try to diagnose what exactly is the issue that's driving the population trends upward. Unfortunately, we don't have any data in addition to what CDCR has kind of presented here today that would help us to give you a diagnosis. But I think we could suggest some questions that you might want to ask the department to kind of get there. We do know there's been a slight uptick in crime, so that may be a contributing factor to some of the increase in admissions. But the increase in the population projections is certainly larger than the slight uptick in crime that we've seen. So there appears to be something else going on there. So I think a good question you may want to start by asking the department to present some data on whether this trend in new admissions is consistent across the state, or whether there may be particular counties that are accounting for a larger percentage of the increase. For example, with the second strikers, an increase of 33% in 1 year is a pretty remarkable increase. And I think we'd be curious to see whether there are particular counties that may have changed sentencing practices that may be driving some of that increase. We don't know. I mean, it could be related to the counties that may be sending more people or perhaps have more increase in crime. It's hard to say because we don't have the data, but I think that's a good question to get at to start to find out what might be going on there. You could also ask the department whether the people that are being committed are individuals that are currently on community supervision. If they are, and then perhaps then that maybe suggests that there could be improvements to community supervision to prevent more people from coming to prison from those programs. Once you've been able to diagnose the problem, I think you have a variety of policy options that you can implement to address the growth, but the first step is really kind of figuring out what's driving the increase, and then you can think about what are the appropriate policy mechanisms to take to address that growth.
Did the department want to respond? Because it seemed pretty reasonable on the Stockton facility, and I'll just add, and it's probably more anecdotal than anything else. When I first got elected and I started meeting with the public safety professionals in my district, sheriff, school police, university police, they talked about not an increase in murders, but in personal property thefts were soaring through the roofs, and in some ways they attributed it to realignment, and they had all sorts of anecdotal reasons, but they didn't really have any facts. But they could sense that there was an uptick in the number of particular types of crimes. And even in your presentation, you talk about parole, new terms, reoffender parole, but I didn't hear much about the specific crimes, which we may get to. What the LAO is looking at is what kind of crimes are people recommitting, and what's going on out there at the local level, where people are dealing with this on a daily basis. And then again, answer their question, but thinking about, have you had discussions with local law enforcement about what's going on out there in the world and ways to help combat that?
Yeah, so I think starting with the Stockton facility, absolutely fair. We're working on that reconciliation. We'll have an update for the May revision. I would just note that in addition to the population that the Legislative Analyst's Office calls out, we've opened a state-of-the-art, one-of-the-kind facility. And so as we just go through that first year of activation, we're going to have good information about the number of beds and the expenditures, as well as other operational issues. So we're happy to provide that update for the May revision, and we're working on that. In terms of the population numbers, I absolutely, we're continuing the discourse that we've had with our local partners around what's happening in terms of the commitments, and Mr. Atkins can speak to some of the data that we do have available. I think it's really important, as I noted earlier, fundamentally the parole revocation process is different, and that presents a different set of challenges. And so we have seen a notable increase in the subpopulation for second strikers, but we've also, as a result of realignment, fundamentally changed the landscape for our local partners as well. So we're engaged in conversations with them to better understand that, but really it's this change around the parole revocation process which may be contributing to that. So we're continuing our dialogue with the local partners and seeking to better understand that so we can better project it. I think it's also important to note that when we're projected to be at 194,000 inmates, and we've implemented realignment. We're now in the 137,000 range. We are talking about a subpopulation with its own significant increase, but we're talking about that in the hundreds there. So just in the overall context, it's an important issue that we need to look at, but still fundamentally we've achieved the objectives of realignment.
If it's if the committee would like to have numbers on specific counties, I can do a comparison between two different time periods. There's two ways of looking at it, two different points in time, like I was giving you June 30th data, but more appropriate would be looking at intake from court for all the counties by county for two different time periods, like a 6-month period or a year period. So I'm more than happy to provide that if that's what the will of the committee is.
So if I were to suggest just to do the members of this committee and their counties that they're in and kind of get some kind of projection.
Okay. And then maybe you can correct me, but were you referring to probation or parole?
What I was speaking to is, I guess, any form of community supervision.
So one of the things that I wasn't going to get too far into, but one of the things we've noticed where we used to have parole violators that came back with new terms or parole violators returned to custody, those that are now going to the probation, post-release community supervision, or PRCS, they can't come back in as a parole violator because we discharge them to the county. So they're starting to show up in our new admission population. So part of our admission population is an offset of what we used to get as parole violators with new terms. So that's one thing. And so, you know, we can pull those out, you know, where those that came in the front door, where they really last on probation. But there's also something called probation violators, and then there's a very sliver of a group that can actually be violated. There's certain lifers that are on parole for life that can be violated back to prison, but that's really tiny. So I was just trying to get clarity of what it is. And I'm one for details, so I'm sorry for digging too deep.
I was just going to say we'd be happy to work with the committee staff to refine the request.
And I wasn't sure if we're looking at the number of new violators that are coming in, and I think that's where you're getting at, that you're treading, you know, you're not getting ahead of the curve because the curve keeps getting wider. And so I think that's what the LAO and maybe even the governor's office is concerned about, is making sure the great work you've done, and I'll be the first one to say, and I know you've said it probably about 15 times along with Dr. Beard, that you've gone from 190,000 down to 140, and that's 55,000 out of the number, which is commendable, and this administration has probably done a heck of a lot more than previous, and you really should be commended. And I think everyone in here commends you. It's just it's these 3 court judges that they just seem to be a little problematic about the fact that you, I guess the number, you've had like an 80% success rate or 75%, but you're getting hammered about the last 20% or whatever that percentage is. And so I'm with you. It's just that last 10 or 20%, it's we just got to get it off our books, and once and for all, and call it success. Okay. Any Questions from the committee?
LAO. I recently was at a tour at CIM, the district I represent, Chino. I was surprised to see that the mental health beds were deactivated. So I just want to know some update on that, and are they going to come back online? Because I feel that a lot of these inmates are coming in with those mental health issues, and just to make sure we're taking care of them appropriately.
Yeah, sure. So I think there were about, let's see, 36 what they call mental health crisis beds at the California Institution for Men. Those were temporary beds, is my understanding, and finance may be able to speak to this better than I can, but my understanding those were temporary beds. So the intent was that those beds would be stood up for a limited period of time while the state constructed more permanent mental health crisis beds pursuant to a court order that we provide these services, as we were constructing those new beds. And those new beds at the California Healthcare Facility in Stockton have been completed. There were also some new beds that were or will be activated at the California Men's Colony prison. And so with those new permanent beds being completed, the temporary beds at CIM and some other temporary beds are going to be deactivated, and I think that was always the intent and the plan, but I think finance may be able to speak better to that issue.
Clint Kelm, Department of Finance. The LEO's recollection of the process is accurate. A part of the long-term mental health bed plan for the department was that there have been some beds in place that provide the level of treatment, so crisis bed care in this case, where they were providing it in modified cell space, and the department had a construction plan in place to look at some more long-term physical plant that was more appropriate for that level of care. So California Men's Colony, that we activated a 50-bed standalone facility there, and with the activation of CHCF, those temporary beds in the system can go down because we now have available space at the other facilities to take on that population with those needs.
Okay, so it'll just be transferred over to a different institution and not at CIM.
Exactly,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay. So what we're going to do is withhold action on the administration's adult population funding request until the May revision, and we're going to direct the department to make adjustments as part of the May revision to reflect savings from the delayed activation of housing units at CHCF, unless further justification is provided. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And from the Office of the Inspector General, an update on access to rehabilitation. The issue before the subcommittee is the Office of the Inspector General's review of CDCR's progress in increasing the percentage of inmates served in rehabilitative programs to 70% of the CDCR's target population prior to their release. Office of Inspector General, California Department of Corrections, Department of Finance, and the Legislative Analyst Office. And we will begin with the Office of the Inspector General.
I don't see anybody from CDCR. Are they coming up? Or no? Okay. Hello, Robert Barton, the Inspector General for CDCR. And again, thank you for inviting me, committee members, Chair. Let me start off by saying that we have two reports, actually, that bear on this subject that we publish. One is as a part of my duties as the chair of the California Rehabilitation Oversight Board. That report will be will be finalized next week at the board's meeting. Secretary Beard is on that board as well. And a portion of that is actually semi-duplicative of what we put out in one component of our blueprint, which the legislature has asked us to do in monitoring CDCR's progress in meeting their blueprint plan, if you will, that was put out and the legislature approved. And so that will be out by the 20th of this month. Both of those reports, and we'll have more specifics, but I can certainly talk about some of the general issues, much of which has already been stated today. So as part of our blueprint report, we actually go out and look at, on the ground, in the facilities, bodies in seats, programs that are running. We do the same thing for CROB. We have someone who tours the institutions. In fact, I think we're having a presentation at our next CROB meeting by that analyst whose job it is to go out and see how programs are working. I would agree with the prior speakers in that one of the other components our blueprint report addresses are construction projects that were in the blueprint, and they are on track and have met the benchmarks for example, CHCF and at least being built and inmates being there, although there is the current hiatus. Also Mule Creek and RJD, the infill beds there look like they're going to happen, about 2,600 out of state, as the Secretary said. We're at about 8,800, I believe. California City Prison, which is the facility he mentioned, is around 2,400 level 2s. The MCCFs, Taft, Delano, Shafter, et cetera, and I'm rounding these numbers, approximately 4,000. And then, of course, one of the things that wasn't mentioned that was raised last year in the hearings was reinstituting fire camps for the department back up to previous levels of 4,500. In the estimation of my staff and myself, I've visited numerous fire camps and talked to numerous inmates programming there. I think that is one of the best rehabilitative programs the state has. Of course, you have, along with that, the difficulty that they no longer have the lower level inmates that qualify to go to those camps. So it's sort of a catch-22. But I've talked to the department about being creative and perhaps looking at ways you can get more people out to fire camps. For example, now no SNY inmates go to those camps. We've talked about ways that maybe someone who's not, for example, a sensitive needs inmate due to sex offenses, but is there for other reasons, dropouts, failure to program in certain institutions could possibly qualify, and it's something I've talked to the administration about. But in addition, there's no doubt that capacity and these additional beds I've just talked about will allow those short-term benchmarks set by the court to be met. But as the Secretary admits, the department still has a lot of work to do in the area of rehabilitation, as well as what the chair stated earlier. We want to get these off our books, but the real key from the Inspector General's perspective, and I think it was the LAO's perspective as well, is not just getting them off our books, but keeping them off our books long term. And that really is where I think rehabilitation has to focus. I think there's a real danger, and I'm not saying this is occurring, but I think there's a real danger for the parties involved to say, okay, we've got a reprieve from the federal court and slow down in our efforts for rehabilitation. That would be a huge mistake, because the benefits of effective programming you're going to see 2 years down the road. Just about when we need to see those inmates who are being released in the next 2 years not recidivate, we've got to be programming them now. And so there is a concern, and there are several challenges, and the department certainly, I won't say has not faced hurdles in getting their programs up and running. But we still see challenges, for example, with a case management system that follows the logic model. And so one of the things that all of the rehabilitation was predicated in was following the logic model, one of which says when someone comes into prison, much like you have a student in high school or a student in college, and you set up a plan for their major or whether they're going to be going to a certain university, and that follows them through the years, and you say, you got to take these classes, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. Well, it doesn't change every semester. It pretty much follows them through, and you set those goals at the beginning. And the department had a pilot project that they tried with the case management system. Again, for reasons outside of the people involved's control, it was with the female population. And we took that population and dispersed it, well, not dispersed it, but compacted it, and lost a lot of the people that would have been in that pilot project. And whether or not that means at the end of the day that project no longer had the feasibility to tell us anything or not, I'm not sure. But I do know that the department now is not looking to follow that project or that pilot, but rather to look at another system, the SOMS system, in setting up certain type of case management. Because if an inmate comes in with 5 or 10 years and they've assessed their risk and their needs with the tools that we currently have in place, what's to say that when they get shifted from prison to prison to prison, that plan doesn't follow them, because currently it doesn't. And so now we're trying to, for lack of a better term, sort of affect those people that were within 2 to 4 years of getting released, which of course makes sense. What I'm saying is, going forward, we need to look at where those people are long-term, so we work towards that in a more systemic way. The department, as the Secretary indicated, has really ramped up its educational programs, both vocation and academics. However, it's all of these other programs that we talk about, not just getting the education component, but also, you know, the gang rehabilitation, the substance abuse, and I would agree with the Secretary, that's a huge area that needs to be increased. The you know, family, anger management, all of those counseling things that really help these population deal with situations they're going to face when they get out. And so one of the other challenges the department has, and I think it's a critical key to success, is getting beyond a lot of the bureaucratic hurdles, like the bid process, the contracting processes, the hiring processes, getting people to want to work in these industries where the prisons are located. And I agree that, you know, the department has faced those and is trying to deal with those, and they certainly are some of the reasons why we haven't. For example, we have 4 of the 13 instead of all 13 up and running of the reentry hubs, which will ultimately be key. Another thing that I will echo from previous speakers from the Inspector General's perspective is that working with those communities in those aftercare facilities, I think, is key. Trying to, and I've heard the Secretary say this as well, so this isn't something new or something they're opposed to, but rather than trying to have CDCR have a facility that a parolee could go to, or somebody that's released from prison to get their education needs or their job needs or their ID or whatever it may be, and then having next door to it the local county one, it doesn't make any sense for anyone in government. And so trying to merge those systems, and I think it's something that everybody should work towards, and I know that the department has indicated a willingness to do so. Finally, the other issue that I think we see from the last year or so is when you look at Compass and where we're trying to put the right bodies in the right programs for what they need, the department still is challenged in that area. In fact, from the population that had both their risk and their Compass needs scores assessed, we've dropped in this last report from 42% to a 29% of that target getting into the right programs. And it's not even, you know, I don't like to use the term the department uses, which is their needs being met, because I don't agree with their standard. A standard that says one inmate in one program for 1 day qualifies as you know, counts as one person's needs being met, I think is unrealistic, and in the long term doesn't serve us well. Now, are there very many people that fall in that category? Probably not. I think the majority of the people that are programming are in for more than 1 day. But what I would like to see the department move to in the long term is an assessment of people who, you know, have done at least a quarter of a class or a half of a class. In a perfect world, it'd be people that had actually completed and gotten certificated in whatever the program was, or could at least show completion. I agree that that's unrealistic due to the realities of prisons and movements and people coming in and out and people voluntarily leaving programs and things of that nature. But one of the issues, I think, is having a strategy, and I believe they're working towards this, and we get you know, we get presentations all the time. In fact, we probably tie up more of their time that they could be spending on the actual programs answering to us. That's a whole other issue. But at the end of the day, the reprieve from the 3-judge panel and meeting those marks on a short-term basis shouldn't be cause for any of us to relax. In fact, I think we should continue to work rapidly, because that payoff, as I said, in rehabilitation programming is going to come 2 years down the road. So need to continue to try to find the places where, you know, teachers will go to work, find the right level inmates, and I get it, it's a moving target. One of the things they should be commended on that you'll see in our blueprint report and Department of Finance could probably speak to this too, where you see sort of a cost benefit is the reclassification program, where they have now reclassified. I think most of them have had their annual review, most of the population, and we've seen a drastic decrease in terms of bodies going from level 4 to 3, 3 to 2, et cetera, and that's reflected in the need for more level 2 beds. I mean, that's why we can actually fill up the MCCFs and Cal City and so on, because those are all level 2 beds, which raises yet another challenge. So we're putting these people now in MCCFs, out of state, and Cal City. Where's their rehab programs? And part of the problem is, because it's short-term, and then it becomes a cost-benefit analysis as well. Is it a waste of money because we don't have them in something that's planned? We've put a cork on this problem as far as our capacity goes, but now we have inmates who are level 2, by definition, have shorter terms and will be getting out. And I can't even tell you as I sit here today, because I have staff literally during this time going out to these various MCCFs to see what's in place. I suspect there's some type of education program that's going to be there, but I couldn't tell you sitting here where these other, I don't know, 12,000. I mean, we know what the folks out of state are getting, but these in-state infill beds or alternative beds, I can't tell you what kind of programming they're receiving. So at the end of the day, again, I don't want to sound like I'm raining on their parade, but at the end of the day, I'm really looking long-term. I think they've made some great short-term gains. I think that they certainly have all of the right intentions, and I just want to urge them to continue to follow those plans and just not relax at this point. I'm happy to answer any questions.